September 1963. Dallas County, Alabama. Selma. The courthouse square on a Monday morning, 6 weeks before the march that has not yet happened, 2 years before the bridge that has not yet become famous. John Wayne is in Alabama for the second time in 14 months. The same producer, the same location scouting, a different picture that may or may not get made. He has been driving since dawn, coming south on Route 80 from Montgomery, and he has stopped in Selma for coffee and because he wants to look at the river. He parks on the square at 8:45. He gets his coffee from a counter on the east side. He is standing on the sidewalk with the coffee cup in his hand when he sees the woman on the courthouse steps. Here is the story. John Wayne is 56 years old. He is in a canvas ranch jacket and a tan Stetson and boots that have been on a lot of Alabama road in the past 2 days. He knows what Selma is in September 1963. He has been reading the papers and he is not a man who reads without understanding what he is reading. He knows about the registration drives and the marches that have been happening in town since spring. He knows about the circuit court injunction that has been used to prevent black residents from meeting in groups of more than 3. He knows that the courthouse on the north side of the square is the only place in Dallas County where a black resident can attempt to register to vote and that the attempt has a very low rate of success by design. He is standing on the sidewalk with his coffee and he knows all of this and he is watching the steps. The woman is on the 3rd step from the top. She is perhaps 40 years old, trim and straight-backed, in a plain cotton dress and low-heeled shoes, her hair pinned back. She has a leather folder under her arm, the kind that holds documents flat. She has been in line since before Wayne arrived on the square. He can tell by the way she is standing, the particular stillness of a person who has been still for a long time and has decided to remain still regardless. She reaches the table at the top of the steps at 9 o'clock. Wayne watches from the sidewalk. The registration official at the table is a man Wayne has not seen before. 35, maybe 40, in a white shirt and a bolo tie, with the unhurried manner of a man who is comfortable with his own authority. He looks at the woman's documents. He looks at them for a long time, longer than necessary. Then he asks her something. She answers. He asks something else. She opens her leather folder and takes out additional papers and places them on the table. He looks at those too. Then he closes the folder without returning the papers inside it and pushes it back across the table and says something and picks up his pen and looks at the next person in line. The woman stands at the table for a moment. Her hand is on the folder. She says something to the official. He does not look up. She says something again. He writes in his ledger. She picks up the folder. She turns and starts down the steps. Wayne sets his coffee cup on the top of a parking meter and walks across the square. He reaches the steps as she is coming down and falls into step beside her, matching her pace, which is measured and unhurried despite everything. She glances at him. She does not break stride. He says, "They turn you away?" She says, "They always turn me away." He says, "How many times?" She says, "This is the 4th. He says, "What reason this time?" She says, "They say my employer verification form is incomplete. It was complete last time and they said the address was wrong. Before that the literacy test. Before that a form that apparently does not exist anymore." She says all of this in the voice of a woman who has catalogued these things carefully and is not surprised by any of them and is also not finished. He says, "What's your name?" She says, "Dorothy. Dorothy Reese." He says, "John." She looks at him properly then, a full look, and places the face and looks back at the steps ahead of her without changing her expression. She says, "I know who you are." He says, "Then you know I don't have any official standing here." She says, "Nobody with official standing has helped me in 4 attempts." He says, "Fair point." They reach the bottom of the steps. She stops and turns and looks back up at the table and the official with his pen and his ledger. Wayne stops beside her. He says, "What would it take?" She looks at him. He says, "To get that form accepted." "What would it take?" She says, "A witness they can't dismiss. Someone standing there who makes the cost of turning me away higher than the cost of processing the form." Wayne looks at her for a moment. He says, "That I can do." They go back up together. The line on the steps shifts to let them pass, not dramatically, just the small adjustments bodies make when something has changed in the atmosphere of a place. Wayne does not look at the people in the line. He is looking at the table. Beside him, Dorothy Reese has her leather folder open again and her documents in her hand and her chin level. The official at the table looks up when he hears them. He sees the woman. He sees the man beside her. This time the recognition is immediate and complete, and Wayne can see it happen, watches it move from the man's eyes to his jaw to his hands, which go still on the table. The pen stops moving. Wayne stops at the table and takes off his Stetson and holds it in his left hand and looks at the official without saying anything. Just looks. He is 6'4" and 56 years old, and he has been in front of cameras for 30 years, and he knows what his face does to a room, and he is letting it do it now without apology. The official looks at him and looks at Dorothy Reese and looks at her documents on the table and looks at Wayne again. Wayne says, "This woman has a completed employer verification form, a valid prior registration attempt on record, and every document your office requires." He says it the way a man reads a list he has memorized, flat and complete. He says, "You're going to process her application." The official says, "Sir, the form has a deficiency," and Wayne says, "It doesn't." The official looks at the form. He looks at Wayne. He looks at the line on the steps behind them. There are perhaps 30 people in that line, and every one of them is watching the table. The official picks up his pen. He asks Dorothy Reese her full name, her address, her date of birth, her employer, her employer's address. He writes each answer in his ledger. His handwriting is smaller than it was before, tighter, the writing of a man who is being careful. He stamps the form. He dates it. He writes a receipt number. He slides the receipt across the table. Dorothy Reese picks it up. She reads it once. She reads it again. Her face does not change, but something in her posture changes, a fraction of an inch, the difference between a person braced for impact and a person who has just learned the impact is not coming. She folds the receipt and puts it in her leather folder with her documents. She says thank you to no one in particular. Wayne puts his Stetson back on. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. They walk down the steps together. At the bottom, Wayne stops and she stops beside him. She looks at the receipt through the leather of the folder, the way a person looks at something through the thing that is containing it, just to confirm it is still there. Then she looks at Wayne. She says, "They'll find another reason next time." He says, "Maybe." She says, "There's always another reason." He says, "Then you come back again." She looks at him. He says, "You came back 4 times. You'll come back again if you have to." She says, "I've been coming back." He says, "I know. That's why it's going to change." She says, "You believe that?" He is quiet for a moment. He says, "I think the people in that line believe it. I think every person who came back after being turned away believes it. I think that's the only thing that ever changes anything, people who keep coming back." She looks at him for a long moment. She says, "It would be easier if you could stay." He says, "I know it would." She says, "But you can't." He says, "I've got a road to drive." She nods. She says, "Well, you came back up the steps with me. That's something." He says, "It isn't enough." She says, "No. But it's something." She shakes his hand. Her grip is firm and direct, the grip of a woman who has been extending her hand for years in circumstances where it was not always taken. He shakes it the same way. Then she turns and walks across the courthouse square in the direction of the parking lot on the south side. He watches her go. She does not look back. Wayne stands at the bottom of the courthouse steps in Selma, Alabama, on a Monday morning in September 1963, and he looks up at the table at the top of the steps where the official is already dealing with the next person in line, pen moving again, the brief interruption absorbed back into the machinery of the morning as if it had not happened at all. He looks at the line on the steps, 30 people in their weekday clothes with their documents in their hands, waiting for their turn at a table that has been designed to fail them. Some of them are looking at him. He does not perform anything for them. No wave, no nod, no acknowledgement that he is recognizable or that what just happened was anything other than 2 people walking up some steps together. He looks at the Confederate statue on the corner of the square, the stone soldier facing north, the inscription below it, the pigeons on the soldier's shoulders who do not know or care what the soldier represents. He has driven past 100 of these statues in the South, and he has never stopped to think about them for more than a second, and this morning he is thinking about this one for longer than that. He stands there long enough to feel the full weight of the morning and of all the mornings before it that he did not stop for, and then he walks back across the square and picks up his coffee cup from the top of the parking meter. The coffee is cold. He drinks it anyway and gets back in his car and drives south toward the river and the road back to Montgomery. Dorothy Reese was a third-grade teacher at the colored school on Alabama Avenue. She had been teaching in Dallas County for 11 years. Her husband, a man named Robert Reese, worked as a mechanic at the Selma Iron Works and had attempted to register to vote twice before Dorothy's first attempt and had been turned away both times by means that were routine enough to be invisible and final enough to be effective. Robert Reese died in 1961 of a stroke, at 44 years old, having never voted. Dorothy continued the attempts after he died because she had told him she would and because she was the kind of woman who kept that kind of promise. Dorothy Reese was registered to vote in Dallas County in September 1963. She voted for the first time that November in the municipal elections, one of fewer than 300 black voters on the Dallas County rolls at that time out of a black population of more than 15,000. She was at the Edmund Pettus Bridge on March 7, 1965, the day that became known as Bloody Sunday. She was in the second row of marchers. She was struck by a state trooper's baton on the bridge and treated for a laceration above her left eye at a house on Sylvan Street that had been converted to a field hospital. She marched again 2 weeks later when the march was completed. She walked all the way to Montgomery. She was there when Dr. King spoke on the steps of the state capitol. She stood in the crowd and listened, and when it was over she drove back to Selma and went to work the next morning. John Wayne drove to Montgomery that afternoon and flew back to Los Angeles. He was in Alabama for the last time that September and he did not know it was the last time. He never spoke of the courthouse square to any reporter or in any interview. He never mentioned Dorothy Reese by name in any letter that has been found. What is known comes from Dorothy Reese herself, who told the account in 1977 to a journalist named Carol Marsh who was writing a piece on Dallas County voting rights history for the Alabama Journal. Reese told it plainly, the way she told most things, without decoration, starting at the first step and ending at the handshake at the bottom. Marsh's article ran in the Alabama Journal in March 1978. It was not widely picked up. It ran once and was filed and stayed filed until a researcher at the Voting Rights Museum found it in 2001 in the journal's microfilm archive and noted the name in the margin. The clipping is in the museum's collection now, in a manila folder in the third drawer of the filing cabinet in the back office, alongside a photograph Dorothy Reese kept for the rest of her life. The photograph was taken by a man in the line on the steps that morning. It shows two figures at the bottom of the courthouse steps, a tall man in a tan Stetson and a woman in a plain dress with a leather folder under her arm. They are shaking hands. Neither of them is looking at the camera. They are looking at each other. The steps are still there. The table is gone. The line is gone. The official with the bolo tie retired in 1971 and died in 1989 and is buried in a cemetery 4 miles from the courthouse. The courthouse itself was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1980. On certain mornings, when the light comes in from the east at the right angle, the shadow of the Confederate statue falls across the courthouse steps in a long diagonal line from the bottom to the top. It reaches the spot where the table used to be and then the sun moves and it is gone. If this story reached you, do me a favor, pass it on. Share it with a veteran in your life. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. There are more Duke stories coming.